Hello everyone and welcome back to IMO Reviews. We have another movie review catch up with 4 films that I caught up with earlier this week. Kicking things off with Beckham. Beckham was a tell-all 4-part documentary on Netflix about one of England's greatest players, David Beckham, and the insane lifestyle and stories that the Beckhams have experienced with a life in the limelight. Now, as many of you already know, I am a huge football fan and I really did try to not be swept up in it and be biased towards the programme, but I can't deny I did enjoy revisiting parts of football history, some of which I remember very clearly. Ironically, I was 7 years old when he put in that performance against Greece, and I think I speak for all children at that point that it sparked something inside all of us. I, along with many other children, the very next day decided to shave their heads and take a bag of balls to the nearest park and try to bend it like Beckham. Mrs. IMO even got to see me blush a little bit. There's Roberto Carlos, that's Luis Figo. I couldn't help but picture myself in Beckham's shoes. I'd have been on cloud 9 cheering sangria with Ronaldo and impressing Zidane so much that the midfield maestro asks you to play with him instead. This is the stuff of football dreams, and I will be eternally jealous of David Beckham's lifestyle because of this. It was also interesting to see the stress and pressure that comes with it too. The paparazzi were unrelenting. In fact, I'd argue they were harassing and stalking. And I am glad that the documentary stopped to point a finger at these journalists and ask them if they were proud of themselves, following a young child to school every day just to get a picture of their dad, or following flights across the world just to know where they are. It's insane and it should never have been the case, but it's sadly true of our culture. We love a Posh and Becks or a Brangelina to a point that we even need to know what they had for dinner and when they went to the toilet. Why? I don't really know. It says a lot about fan culture in that regard and does it respectfully. It never has a go at the fans for loving them, but it does acknowledge that people trying to climb inside of their car for a picture or sneakily following them is way too far. By doing what they love and being good at it, they had put themselves on a pantheon to be exposed to the world both positively and negatively. The bullying that he faced after kicking out at Diego Simeone was ridiculous. It was bullying, there's no other way to put it. Today he could have easily sued them for defamation and the damage to his mental health. But credit to the guy, he pulled his socks up and walked through fire, using his talent to turn it all around. Which was great to see that stubborn, hard-working, British stiff upper lip pulling through, and yet I'm equally disgusted that we as a nation blamed a boy for our failings in a sporting competition, and let it go to an extreme hatred of burning shirts and effigies. It's stuff like that that makes me dislike supporting my own country. We're bad losers, and we expect the world and we never learn. Look at how Saka, Rashford and Sancho were treated. And as much as I've gushed and applauded this documentary, I have to admit it wasn't perfect. Far from it, in fact. David Beckham just isn't the best talker, which makes a 4-part tell-all documentary like getting blood from a stone. He skirts around the affair and even makes excuses for it, which was a bit of a car crash to sit through. And granted, a lot of these stories are a long time ago, but it does feel a touch rewritten in places to not make the Beckhams look bad. I certainly don't remember it all going down quite as smoothly as it's portrayed. The director also tried way too hard to insert himself into the piece rather than actually penetrate the surface of what are easily some of the most media-trained stars in the country. The closing shot of them dancing to Islands in the Stream being the perfect example of what I'm talking about. I don't believe for a second that that was natural. It reeked of a director setting up a nice closing shot. I mean, who goes through the trouble of setting up a vinyl for just one track, dances, then turns it off and cleans up and goes home? Overall, I thought Beckham was fine, although it is a strange scenario where it's actually going to be the people who aren't into football who will get way more out of this documentary. But even then, you're still not walking away with much. So I'm going to give Beckham a 7 out of 10. Next up is Totally Killer, which is a new slasher movie on Amazon Prime, and frankly, this was absolutely miserable to sit through. I don't understand how you've ballsed this up this badly. This is Back to the Future, but instead of trying to go back and make your parents bang, we're going to go back to the 80s to take out a serial killer before the murders happen. So this should be a pretty straightforward, blood-splattering good time, right? So why is it the most lazily written, unfunny, poorly made schlock that I've seen in a long time? It's quite embarrassing that this film has been released in this condition. The effects are so bad, I think it's a stretch to call them effects. It's like someone downloaded a GIF of blood splashing and just inserted it over the footage. The acting and the dialogue is so bad that honestly, in the beginning, I thought it was being way over the top and poorly written on purpose, like it was a tongue-in-cheek slasher film that's going to laugh at the genre and its many cliches. But no, No, it actually just thinks that this is good writing. The killer is easily one of the worst in the slasher genre, with no personality, no motives, no good kills, and he frankly just looks like Spike from Buffy. It's shit. And this is the big point of contention. I have to use a word that will split the room, and I am sorry, but I hated this woke main character. They're just one of those people who finds the minutest task to be the biggest ball ache in the world, and they'll shuffle, mumble, and roll their eyes through everything. Opening a door could become an emotional roller coaster for this character as they continuously find a way to whine about literally anything. If your dialogue is going to be nothing but calling out others for being ableist, sexist, or whatever else, then you better be living life like St. Peter himself. Don't throw stones if you live in glass houses. I cannot stand characters who have absolutely nothing about them except calling out others without any regard or context for the situation. You went to the 80s. Why are you expecting everyone from the 80s to acclimatise to you rather than you to it? How entitled are you that you expect an entire decade of human beings to change just to please your opinion? The only joy I got from this film was the fact that these thick-skinned 80s teenagers didn't give a single shit about what she said, and if anything, they just doubled down and were even ruder and crasser. I'm going to give Totally Killer a 2 out of 10, and frankly it should be grateful that it didn't get the 1. It's awfully close to it. I also saw It Lives Inside, which I thought started fantastically with some really good atmosphere and effective colour schemes, putting a new spin on demonic entities. It decides to take it through the lens of Hinduism, which I thought was fantastic. I actually felt like I learnt something, and equally enjoyed the director's clear love and passion for the culture. That was wonderful and very refreshing. It didn't feel forced at all. It's a slight side note, but I also thought the food looked so good in this movie. I do not know what the mum was cooking up, but I'm pretty sure I saw some lamb in there, some tomato, onion, there was a pitta. My mouth was salivating. I would have been like Goku at that dinner table. And yet, despite trying exceptionally hard to be a new, fresh spin in the horror franchise, this somehow ended up being one of the most cliché, generic, and frankly forgettable movies I've seen in a long time. And it really does pain me to say that because I wanted to like this. Sadly, It Lives Inside just doesn't do anything we haven't seen a million times before. We've got being thrown around by an invisible thing like the Invisible Man. We've got a monster that kinda looks like the Abomination from Alien Resurrection. We've got unsatisfying deaths, lazy jump scares, you name it, it's here. And the longer it went on, the less and less I cared. In fact, by the time we got to the climax, I was struggling to keep my eyes open. It's a strange one because it's competently made, the performances are fine enough, I like the culture change and I thought the sound design was quite impressive. Everything else about it has been stolen or borrowed from better films that have come before. What a shame and what a waste of potential. It Lives Inside gets a 3 out of 10. And finally, I saw Resident Evil Death Island, which only came about because I'm ranking all the Resident Evil movies on my letterboxd. You can find a link to my account in the description below. I honestly didn't even know this came out this year, but here we are. And it might just be the best Resident Evil movie that I've seen so far. Which sounds like very high praise, but you have to remember that this franchise is nothing short of miserable to sit through. This film really did remind me of that Gennaro Gattuso meme, because Death Island really is... sometimes may be good, sometimes may be shit. The animation was impressive at times, especially with shadows and lighting, and then on other occasions it looked goofy as hell. Sometimes the story was actually quite decent, hitting some pretty solid emotional beats and developing character. And sometimes it turns into a completely dull and generic nonsense. I feel like this movie was based on the idea of the villain alone and then taken from there because I actually thought the villain was quite interesting. It may not have been developed perfectly, but they weren't just your generic bad guy. There was emotion, feeling, regret. He was very clearly haunted by something and fixing it in the wrong way. In fact, there's one transition in particular that I thought was way too good, not just for this movie, but the entire franchise. Someone working on this movie is a genuinely competent storyteller who cares about this franchise, but they're equally worried that they're going to lose the audience if they don't stick to the tropes and cliches that they come to expect from it, which in turn makes Death Island a bit of a mess. I'd still argue that it's definitely the most watchable one of the franchise, at least so far. I've still got about 5 or 6 of them to get through, but it really does say a lot that it is my current favourite, and it only gets a 4 out of 10.